The loss of life which is occurring currently in Gaza and Israel is a terrible tragedy. But we should understand how this tragedy occurred and who is responsible for it. Hamas broke the ceasefire that existed between the Palestinians in Gaza and Israel when they decided to launch rockets into the sovereign nation of Israel. This marked a departure from a brief period of time in which there was this ceasefire and which seemed to present some opportunity for hope in resolving the terrible differences that exist between those living in Gaza and those in Israel. But let's be clear about this. My wife and I were in Israel 3 years ago during the very week when the Israeli government turned over the responsibility for governance of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. Subsequent to that, Hamas took over, and Hamas has been engaged in a series of attacks on Israel, not for the purpose of bringing them to the negotiating table, not for the purpose of somehow trying to resolve the differences that may exist there, but rather for the express purpose of attempting to eradicate the state of Israel and to ensure that there is no state of Israel. This is unacceptable. Every sovereign nation, including Israel, has the right to defend itself. One has to only ask oneself what would happen here in the United States if we were attacked from one of our neighbors on our borders. Even though that sounds incredible, imagine if Mexico or Canada started to launch rockets or missiles into the United States, aimed not at military targets even, but aimed at civilian populations for the sheer purpose of attempting to cause terror amongst the population of the United States and to cause destruction of property and death of innocent civilians. We would think very, very shortly before we would respond. And what we would do is probably not just respond in kind, but make sure that we took out those that were attempting to launch these attacks and those who supported it, and destroyed any such infrastructure that was allowing those attacks to take place. That's essentially what Israel is doing. They have a right to self-defense, and we should never, ever forget it. I recall 3 years ago being in Israel, as I say, when the decision was made to turn the responsibility for governance over to the Palestinian Authority. It was a controversial decision within the population of Israel. Ariel Sharon, in one of his last acts as prime minister, okayed this. I recall meeting with him, with other members of Congress, probably the last meeting with Ariel Sharon with a congressional delegation shortly after he had been condemned by some in the Knesset for taking this step, because those folks said to him that he was basically putting Israel in danger. His response was that he thought it was worth the risk to see if it could lead to peace. And unfortunately, this effort at peace by the Israeli government, by the Israeli people, has had a response by those who rule in Gaza, that is Hamas, that is anything but peaceful. And that's the unfortunate tragedy that has unfolded. A step towards peace, a good faith effort to attempt to move beyond war and conflict, has been received not as such an effort, but rather as an invitation to engage in even more violence. And so I think we should all remember who is responsible for this latest round of tragedy, of violence in that very volatile part of the world. It is not the Israeli government nor the Israeli people. It is, in fact, Hamas. And Hamas should be held accountable for this. It is my hope and my prayer that somehow this conflict will be resolved, that in the end Hamas will no longer be able to launch such attacks on the people of Israel, and that those peace-loving people those peace-loving Palestinians who are in Gaza and other areas, the West Bank, for instance, that those will decide that, in fact, Hamas is not their leadership, and that they will turn to peaceful means of negotiation so that they can move forward in bettering their own people, in improving their living standards, and giving them the opportunity to seek what we all seek, a peaceful life for ourselves and for our children.